All right, welcome. I am Kevin Roberts, joined with Taylor Smith. We are going to break down the Week 16 NFL DFS main slate for DraftKings. These are only the Sunday games. Typically, our process is aimed at single-entry tournament builds, but hopefully you can use this information for whatever your process is. We are going to start by going through each game by game.
Okay, I guess we'll start with Colts Falcons. Atlanta's favored by a point at home, 44.5 total. On the injury front, looks like Jonathan Taylor is going to be back. How much he plays remains to be seen, but I'd imagine he should be fine for something resembling a regular workload. Michael Pittman is questionable right now as of Thursday. He's been limited in practice. He got murdered the other day during the Steelers game. Got concussed. We'll see if he plays. So starting with the Colts, this game isn't a dome. This is a pretty ugly 9-game slate. Anyone stand out here for you?
Well, it's actually surprisingly kind of a healthy total compared to the slate, and it's projected to be a tight game throughout. Both teams have a lot to play for. JT being back, he's a pretty good price. It does project to be owned, but I don't think that should deter us at all. Minshew and Downs are really affordable, and like you said, it's an ugly slate. So those guys are in play, but probably for Indy, the only guy I'm really looking at is JT. If Pittman is out, Downs looks a lot better, though.
Downs and Alec Pierce. I think Alec Pierce may have gotten more looks last week after Pittman went out, but that would be a pretty good value. Downs is a pretty good PPR guy. Obviously, DraftKings is PPR. So he's been a pretty decent source of targets all season for Minshew. I think Taylor is the main attraction, though. The matchup with Atlanta is pretty good. We do like the indoor game as well. And 7,200 is cheap, like you said. Yeah, we're kind of waiting on the Pittman news. He's priced up if he does play. He has been good. I don't mind the spot. Might be somewhat contrarian maybe if he does play. But obviously we don't know as of now. Shifting to Atlanta, they made a move at quarterback again. Desmond Ridder out once again. Taylor Heineke in. Falcons are a shit show every week because their coach doesn't know what he's doing. Good spot. They're favored. Over 3 touchdown total. But are you on anything with this team?
I am weirdly kind of on Bijan Robinson. He totally burned me in my fantasy playoffs. He burned everybody because I liked him in DFS last week too, and he was just terrible. Can we trust Arthur Smith? No, we cannot. But I just don't understand why you wouldn't feed Robinson. And recency bias is going to lower his ownership. Looking at the matchup, it is really good. In the last 4 weeks, the Colts are the 3rd worst defense against running backs. So it's kind of weird to me that it's at 10% for his ownership. If that stays or comes down, Bijan's going to look really interesting because for what he can do and how talented he is too cheap. So was last week just a case of the Panthers weirdly were stopping the run and then he lost the fumble and then Arthur Smith went away from him? Maybe. And if they go back to him, he could wreck in this matchup. So as far as a GPP play, I really like him. The wide receiver matchup isn't that appealing against Indy, but Drake London is really cheap, and I think he gets quarterback upgrades, so he is a GPP play as well.
Any Kyle Pitts?
Forever and always, no. I mean, good talent. They don't use him as much as he should. He actually projects okay. And if you're looking at the matchup, Colts have been pretty good against tight ends, so I don't know about that. But just because the way he's been used all season, I never like to trust him. And there's other tight end plays that look a lot better on this slate.
Bijan played 58% of the snaps the other day, compared to 50 for Tyler Algier. Algier had been kind of phased out a little in recent weeks. He hadn't played more than 29 since week 12. He hadn't played more than 35 since week 9. Maybe it was the fumble, like you said. Maybe it was just nothing was going well in that game. The weather was horrible. They couldn't do anything. They wanted to shake things up a little. I don't know. It's anyone's best guess what they do with Bijan on a week-to-week basis. It's frustrating. But he is 6'3". It is a good spot. I get it. I will have no faith if I wind up with him, but I also don't mind it just because we know what kind of ceiling he has.
Yeah, he's gonna pop in the projections. If you're using lineup optimizers, he's going to be there, and you're gonna be like, oh, like, because you don't want to do it. But I mean, I just don't get that situation at all.
No one does. Next up, we have the ugliest game on the schedule, lowest total on the board. Green Bay at Carolina. Packers are favored by 5. 37 total, lowest on the slate. Packers have been kind of sucking it up lately. Panthers have been sucking it up all season, though they did win the other day.
Yeah.
Obviously, Carolina is not a good defense. Anything on Green Bay stand out to you?
I mean, I think everybody that's healthy for Green Bay is playable, but the only guy that really stands out is going to be Aaron Jones. Worth noting, he did, I think he had 17 touches last week, 13 carries for 55 yards and 4 catches. And that was his first game back from injury. So I would imagine he can go full bore here. And the Panthers on the season are not good against the run. I think they did really well last week, at least against Bijan. But I just would lean towards the Packers here as far as that run game matchup. They are tougher against the pass, and it is on the road. So I'm not as excited about Jordan Love and a banged-up Packers wide receiver core because Jaden Reed just hurt his ankle. Christian Watson probably isn't due back. So I would prioritize Aaron Jones.
Jones did get out-snapped by Dillon the other day, and there doesn't seem to be much rhyme or reason to that scenario on a week-to-week basis. It's kind of just vibes in the backfield. Like if A.J. Dillon's going well, they might give him a little more work, but I don't really think he's playable, of course. And then I guess Jones is the guy by default just because there's nothing else here. The passing game is disgusting. Too many guys getting looks, injuries, like you said. I don't know. Jaden Reed was mega chalk the other day. He scored a touchdown right before getting hurt. But it's pretty grim out there. I don't really see much worth targeting. Carolina, obviously even worse. There is some ownership coming into Chuba Hubbard for 57 and Jonathan Mingo for 36. Jonathan Mingo has been a bad chalk play recently. 2 weeks ago, I believe he was. Let's see, an implied team total of around 16 points. I can't imagine there's much on Carolina that you're interested in.
You'd be wrong, just because the Packers defense is making Tommy Cutlets and Baker Mayfield into DFS gods out of nowhere. So this is one of those things where, like, the Panthers just won. They could be gaining confidence. The Packers defense is in total shambles. I mean, you have like their team defensive leader on Twitter complaining about, people giving them crap about sucking or what have you. They have probably the worst defensive coordinator in the entire NFL. So they just make average or bad offenses look really good. So Hubbard looks totally fine. Packers cannot stop the run at all, and Hubbard can also be he can make an impact as a receiver out of the backfield. And then Mingo is really cheap. They just are good at giving guys their career games. Mingo hasn't done anything noteworthy on the year. Classic Packers gifting Mingo an amazing, his number one game as a rookie probably. But it's not safe because this is also a good spot for the Packers defense in theory. But there is a lot to like here because they aren't expensive.
I wouldn't say there's a lot to like. I would say I get that they're cheap, but they're still the Panthers. They still have had no good games all season long.
Yeah,
I guess Hubbard is a fine value, but that's pretty much it for me. I don't think I'm going to be playing Bryce Young.
I mean, I don't think you want to, but I mean, you're selling the matchup here a little bit. The Packers defense has not looked good. And the Panthers are at home, they got nothing to lose.
Panthers offense has also not looked good.
That's true. But it's a war of attrition. If they come in here and the Packers defense is just like done, mentally checking out, the Panthers could have their best game of the year. So no, I'm not racing to stack Panthers by any means, but they are viable despite the ugly game total.
Moving on to Cleveland and Houston to take on the Browns. 2.5-point spread in favor of Cleveland. 40 total here. Another dome game. Joe Flacco will be in there for the Browns, presumably through this questionable tag. David Njoku's been kind of rejuvenated with Flacco in there. Amari Cooper as well. Good spot. Don't mind the salaries here, but it's looking not like overwhelming chalk. Njoku, Ford, Elijah Moore all around 10%. The Browns defense also gaining some steam against an injury-riddled Texans offense. Are you on the Flacco wagon this week?
No, the matchup isn't bad. The Texans have been a bottom 10 unit against quarterbacks over the last 4 weeks, and he's actually been weirdly really good. So I think like a Flacco and the Njoku stack or mixing Amari, I think that's fine. I'm just not going to prioritize it. It's a low total, and just trusting the Browns defense in general and being on the road, big game for both teams. I'm probably not going to go there.
I think I am going to have interest. I think you can stack him with maybe a cheap Elijah Moore and hope he gets 10 points. Flacco has been good. They've been throwing the ball quite a bit. I'm not scared of the matchup. I think there's reason to have interest here. I certainly have a lot more interest in this team than Carolina, for example. On the other side, again, CJ Stroud likely to not play. Nico Collins maybe will be in there. He was limited yesterday in practice after missing last week. This offense looks gross. Devin Singletary went off last week. Since Case Keenum was under center, they didn't really have much else to do besides run it, and it worked out. Even in a bad matchup, this week's matchup is also not good. Are you going to Devin Singletary at 5.5?
Considering he projects as one of the chalkiest plays at the moment, I probably will not. And lately, the Browns have been a little bit better against running backs from a fantasy perspective. So, I mean, the volume is there. So there's that. But it's not the best spot. And if everybody's going to be on him, I'll gladly go somewhere else.
What about Noah Brown if Nico Collins is out?
He's not really that cheap, 5.2. I mean, the role should be good, but if Nico Collins is out, you can consider it, but I don't know if I'm going to force it necessarily. The Browns' pass defense is pretty good. I think that is their strength. If we look at how they've been doing, yeah, they're kind of middle of the pack lately, but on the season, their pass defense is not one you want to trifle with.
I did have 11 targets the other day, for what it's worth. I guess you can go there if Nico's out again, but not the most alluring play on the board.
I will say the Browns have not been good against tight ends, so maybe Dalton Schultz. He pops a little bit more to me because he's only 4.6K. Case Keenum can be a bit of a check down guy at times. So Schultz is on my radar at tight end.
Seattle at Tennessee, another short spread, 2.5 for the Seahawks, 41.5 total. Geno Smith should be in there this week after missing the last game. Kenneth Walker, maybe a little banged up. This is a good spot. The Titans defense has been good against the run over the last few years, but you can throw on them. Seattle may pick up some ownership. Tyler Lockett is quite cheap these days at only 56. Even DK maybe a little bit at 67. JSN's come on a little bit of late. He's still only 4,500. Are you going to be stacking the Seabirds?
I probably will not be stacking them, but I think they're just fine. The Titans have not been as good against the run lately, so Walker, he's really explosive. So Walker is certainly interesting at that price. I don't know how much I trust Geno in general. He's got a groin injury, I think. So is it groin?
I don't know.
Okay, I think it is, but and anything like that can be kind of tricky. It seems like he's going to start, though, so the Seahawks are in play. I guess based off of ceiling, I would like DK the most, just because he's a tough cover and he can, break a slate all on his own. But overall for the Seahawks, I'd probably look at Kenneth Walker or just avoid it.
Tennessee lost to Houston last week. Will Levis is hurt. Ryan Tannehill is probably going to be in there again this week. Looks terrible. Not a great matchup. Not a terrible matchup. DeAndre Hopkins coming in quite popular at only 6,100. Derrick Henry, I think, gained 10 yards last week on like 20 touches, so that was quite enthralling to see. Chig Okonkwo also popping as a very popular target. Are you getting to either of these guys?
I feel like Chig has looked appealing all year. Like he's had really soft matchups and he never gets it done. So I'm not really interested in him at all. The only guy that I actually am interested in, but still a little bit hesitant to pull the trigger on is going to be Derrick Henry, because in the last in the last 4 weeks, the Seahawks have allowed the second most rushing yards to running backs. So this has become a very soft matchup, and Henry is like super game flow dependent. If they are suddenly getting crushed, which is certainly possible, then he's going to be a bust really quickly. But he projects okay, and it looks like a really good spot based off of how Seattle's run defense has been performing lately.
He's not that cheap though. For 68, like, wouldn't you rather just get to JT for 400 more, for example?
Well, I mean, JT is going to be chalky. It's JT's first game back. Indy is no stranger to, splitting the reps or taking it easy on JT when he comes back. So it's probably mostly an ownership play. But for what Derrick Henry can do, 6.8 isn't like too expensive by any means.
He's also getting out-snapped a lot lately by Tyjae Spears, like 54% for Henry last week, 52% for Spears. Henry was on the wrong end of that the 2 weeks prior to that. Is that just game flow type thing? Like they were playing from behind and need Spears in there?
Well, he's definitely lost snaps regardless of game flow, but I think a lot of the times, if you go back and look, it is game flow dependent to the point where they're playing catch up or they're just getting their ass kicked. So if they're down and they can't effectively run, yeah, Henry's not going to be out there on third downs in like clear passing situations. But I mean, they're going to try to run the ball here, and this matchup is definitely leaving the door open to them having a big day.
Another gross one here. The Commanders at Jets. Jets are actually favored by a field goal here, which is a little shocking to see. Sam Howell got benched in the middle of last week, but they said after the game he's going to be the starter still, which, whatever, doesn't make much sense. We actually saw Jacoby Brissett do pretty well once he came into the game, much better than Howell was performing. So I guess we know there's a short leash here. The matchup's terrible. The Jets defense is good. Terry McLaurin's still affordable, still looks okay, but this team in general just might be a full fade.
Yeah, I have no interest in the Commanders. The Jets defense still has the potential to completely destroy anybody they face. They're out of the playoffs, so that can make things go different ways than you'd expect. But it's in New York. Howell did not look good last week at all, and by the numbers, the matchup's terrible. The Jets are the number one defense in the last 4 weeks against fantasy quarterbacks, and I don't really trust an injured Brian Robinson if he plays. And Antonio Gibson was supposed to be a great value with this huge role last week, and he just ended up splitting the work with Chris Rodriguez. So you just can't trust what the Commanders are going to do. So I'm going to fade them completely, I think.
Jets on the other side, kind of popular. Their defense is coming in around 36% projected ownership, which is significant. They are cheap for 31, but that's a lot for a defense. Garrett Wilson, 5,800. Breece Hall, 6,100. It is a good spot for them. Washington's defense is certainly not nearly as potent as it may have been in previous years. There's some question at quarterback this week. There's some question at quarterback all season. Are you going to be eating this chalk?
I mean, if it's like full-blown chalk, I will second guess it, but I also may not care because the matchup is so good. Over the last 4 weeks, Commanders are 30th against quarterbacks, 31st against running backs, and dead last against wide receivers. So Garrett Wilson, Breece Hall absolutely look good. I don't know if I really want to put my trust in Trevor Siemian at this point, but he is 4.7 and the matchup is really good. I probably wouldn't go full stack there, but I do really like Garrett Wilson. Weird that he's only at 7% ownership right now. I'm assuming that spikes. Breece at 17 looks just about right, and he's just too cheap. It's a really good spot, and he's way too cheap. So of all the guys, I'd probably go Breece then Garrett, but as gross as it is, I may find myself with 2 Jets in my lineups this week.
And you would play him with Siemian or no?
I don't think I would stack. I don't think I would stack with Siemian. I think he's fine because of the matchup, but it's still Trevor Siemian. And I would imagine Garrett Wilson is more like the chain mover, high targets, yardage, and then Breece Hall is going to be the big money maker here for this offense.
Moving on to an actual appealing game, Detroit at Minnesota. Lions favored by 3. Minnesota playing with a backup QB. Nick Mullins should be in or will be in there again. Detroit is healthy, splitting carries between Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery. This isn't a dome, so Jared Goff presumably will play well because that seems to be a thing. This should be a popular target, I would think, this week as a stack.
Yeah, there's really no reason not to. The Lions defense has been really erratic and pretty good total. Definitely, is it the best one on the slate? It's close.
Miami Dallas is a little higher.
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, as far as stacking, it makes a lot of sense to do so. The Lions are definitely in good form after just destroying the Broncos last week. I think 42 points. So, Amon-Ra St. Brown, the sun god, is very much in play. Projects very well. Goff, Laporta, Gibbs, everybody on the Lions. I even like Jameson Williams a little bit as a punt. He got 7 targets last week, his career high in targets. So, the Vikings defense is good. I will say that. But look at last week, the Vikings-Bengals game kind of got out of hand. So it's a big game for both sides. So I wouldn't really worry that much about the matchup and just focus on the Lions' potential here.
Are you messing with the backfield?
Probably not, just because we've already talked about 2 or 3 really good plays, whether it be Brees, Bijan, and then there's obviously JT, and maybe even Derrick Henry. So I don't think you have to, but they always produce. It might end up being which one. You might have to pick. And
it was Gibbs. It was Gibbs on Saturday. But we've obviously seen Montgomery pop off a time or 5 already this season.
Yeah.
Minnesota, Nick Mullins, 5,300. Great spot at home against Detroit. I'm going to be playing him a lot. He's probably going to be my highest owned player.
Okay.
He's got great weapons. He's cheap. Justin Jefferson's back. Jordan Addison went off last week. He is also relatively affordable. Hawkinson's one of the better tight ends, as always. And you can get him with a cheap QB. I don't really see any reason not to play them.
I'll tell you the reason. He's not good. Okay, the main issue with Nick Mullins is that he could get benched. He was not good last week. He is historically a turnover machine. So I don't trust him. I would probably just aim for a safer or somebody with more upside. That said, it is a good spot. It is a high total. And I love Jefferson this week. Way too cheap. Jefferson, I will eat that chalk. 26%, eat that chalk all day. And I do like Ty Chandler because his role is massive, and they went public and said that's not going to change. So, I mean, I don't fault you for it. If you're doing a lot of entries, Nick Mullins should be on some of your teams. But if you're doing a single entry, I don't think I'm going to go with Nick Mullins just because I can see a big-time crater or benching coming out of him.
There's certainly downside, but if he's bad last week and still goes for 300 and multiple touchdowns, I will happily take that.
Sure.
And I will play him in single entry because it's a great stack. He's an affordable QB. It's a pretty ugly slate overall. I really don't see any reason not to play him in any format.
Well, we'll get to that.
Again.
I'm not saying he's a bad play. I'm not saying he's a bad play at all. I'm just saying I don't trust him because the Vikings have been kind of wishy-washy with their quarterbacks to this point already.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you can't trust him, but I think he is a logical option.
Sure. Of course. On paper, the price and the weapons and the matchup, yes.
Florida battle. Jacksonville at Tampa Bay. Bucks are favored by a point at home. Walloped the Packers last week. Jacksonville is kind of skidding these days. Trevor Lawrence is iffy. I believe he has a concussion. Calvin Ridley's popping for a lot of ownership. Targets have been up a little bit of late. Zay Jones is iffy. What stands out on Jacksonville?
Everything. I would imagine because it's only a 1-point spread, my guess is Trevor Lawrence is going to play. I think if he was going to be out, Vegas would have reacted to that already, and that the spread would be a lot thicker. So historically, the Buccaneers are not a run-friendly team. I don't think that keeps you off of Etienne because he can get touchdowns and he's a good player. He can, he's playable anyways. But I would be prioritizing a Jaguars passing stack here. The Buccaneers are a pass funnel offense. Let's see where they're ranking here. Well, lately they've actually been better, but on the season they are a bottom 10 defense against quarterbacks, and they are a bottom 5 defense against wide receivers. I think even against tight ends. Yep, bottom 5 against tight ends too. So you're looking at Kelvin Ridley, you're looking at Evan Ingram, Trevor Lawrence if healthy, and even very cheap Parker Washington, because if people are forgetting, Christian Kirk is out. And I think Zay Jones left last week injured with a hammy. So if he's out too, Parker Washington looks like one of the best values on the slate.
Sounds gross. Tampa Bay, like I said, slight favorite at home. Chris Godwin may be banged up, had a huge game the other day. Baker Mayfield had maybe the best game of his life at Lambeau Field.
Sure,
Rashad White.
did. I was there at that game. So
you were there?
Oh, I was there.
Oh, lovely. Glad you got to witness that in person.
Well, it was lovely initially.
Rashad White seems to go off every week. He's now priced up to 7,400 though, which is quite high. I think he started the season around 5K, so that's quite a leap for him. Baker has also come up to 6K. Mike Evans has had a nice season. He's projecting well for 7,600. Can they do it again this week?
Yeah, they can. The Jaguars have been kind of stingy against the run lately, so I don't know if I'd prioritize White as his price is coming up. He's still playable just because he does so much for that offense. But I would be looking at the Buccaneers passing game here. With Godwin nicked up, I'd probably just go to Mike Evans and not really worry about Godwin too much. You're looking at Baker Mayfield, Godwin stack perhaps, and then maybe a run back with one of the Jaguars guys. But I think this is a sneaky shootout. I think the total is a little bit too low. It's a huge game for both teams. It's a good game weather environment. So if people are not going to be on this game as a whole, I will be. I do not feel great about potentially eating a chalky Baker, especially since he's just historically very inconsistent. After just going crazy in this last game, it's very realistic to expect him to come down to earth here. But the matchup is good. The Jaguars' pass defense is not nearly as tough as their run defense, so I do like it.
Let's see. This game, the next one, has the highest total on the board, 49.5. Miami is a slight home favorite over Dallas. Cowboys got roasted last week in Buffalo, on the road again against an AFC East opponent. Potential shootout, two elite offenses. Certainly neither will be cheap. Do you think Dallas can bounce back? And are you going to play Dak Prescott on Sunday?
Well, Dak and Tua both project to be somewhat contrarian compared to the chalky options, which is kind of surprising since this is the game with the most upside. On paper, Miami is not a good matchup for the Dallas defense. The Dolphins are a top 10 unit against quarterbacks and wide receivers over the last 4 weeks. So do we throw that out the door because it's a huge game with a high total? Maybe, but it's worth noting that. I probably will not be as on this game as the majority will. I'll probably look for a different spot. Like I said, the Jaguars-Buccaneers game looks appealing to me. We talked about the Vikings-Lions game. So there are – like CD is always playable. I like CD, and Pollard could be good and he's a good price, but I don't think I'm going to force the Dallas side of this game.
Tyreek Hill sat out last week for Miami. I saw he was limited in practice today with his ankle injury. If he plays, he's the most expensive player on the slate. He's been slate breaking all season long. Rough matchup, though. Obviously, the Dallas defense is good, but Miami does have a very high total in this one. Achane and Mostert generally splitting carries in the backfield. Mostert remains a touchdown machine, though. Jalen Waddle went completely off with Hill out last week. He's up to 78 in this one. I'm not sure how playable he is if Hill is in, because that's a premium salary for a wide receiver too. What do you like on the Miami side?
If Tyreek is not going to be limited, and if the injury and the price are going to bring down his ownership in the perceived difficult matchup, then I really like Tyreek. because the Cowboys actually lately have not been good good at stopping wide receivers at all. So, and given the high total, and I think initially at the beginning of the year, the Dallas defense was really, really tough, and injuries, specifically to Diggs, have kind of chipped away at that. So I trust the Miami offense a lot here. They need to get back on track. Both these teams do. So I do think it's going to be a bit of a shootout. It's just going to be interesting as far as like prioritizing the pricing and picking exactly the right spots. I do kind of hope Tyreek's out, though, just because it'll make it easier for me. Waddle will be a wide receiver one. He'll be very easy to get to.
Last and least, Arizona at Chicago. Cardinals are 4-point dogs on the road. 43 total. Not sure why this is a late game, but it is. Stacked Arizona a little bit last week. They did a whole lot of nothing against San Francisco. This matchup is really not a whole lot better. Kyler Murray may be still cheap for regular Kyler Murray, but he has not been regular Kyler Murray since he came back. James Conner kind of always hovering in the 6K range. Trey McBride way up to 57 now. Still projects well, though, and still projects for quite a bit of ownership. He's really the only pass catcher that does anything for this team. He just gets peppered with targets. I think he's still playable at 57. What about the rest of this offense?
I think you said it pretty perfectly. The Bears defense is actually really good right now. They are a bottom 5 matchup for wide receivers and a bottom 10 matchup for quarterbacks at the moment. Might actually be worse than that. Yeah, they are second against quarterbacks in terms of least points allowed over the last 4 weeks. However, the thing that does look good is Trey McBride, like you just noted. They are bottom 5 at stopping tight ends. So I don't like Kyler here. I don't like James Conner. I don't like their wide receivers, but I definitely like Trey McBride. He is getting targeted like crazy, and they'll probably be playing from behind. So he's probably the one I'm looking at. I think due to price and upside, Kyler is viable for GPPs, but I'll probably just go McBride.
Chicago. Justin Fields is really popping. He's 7,100. He's cheap for a QB with rushing upside like that. The slate is lacking high-end quarterbacks. We don't have any Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, Brock Purdy, Josh Allen, not on the slate. He may be the most popular QB on the board. It's hard to avoid him. Good matchup, great matchup. The question is, do you stack him with anyone, or are you playing him nude?
That's a really good point. I think the Cardinals have been pretty good lately against wide receivers. I don't think that would keep me from stacking DJ Moore just because he's kind of matchup proof. I would probably stack, and Justin Fields, chalk be damned, is my favorite quarterback on this slate. The Cardinals are a bottom 5 defense right now against fantasy quarterbacks, and they're actually number 1 dead last against fantasy running backs, which doesn't get me interested in the Bears running backs. It gets me interested in designed runs for Justin Fields and the plays breakdown. Specifically, they just can't track anybody and they can't stop anybody up front. So Fields is going to have a massive game, I think. Finding that right stack could prove difficult, but I think, let's just not get cute. If you're going to stack, I'd just stack DJ Moore.
I think the only other one I would have interest in is Kmet, just because tight end is generally a wasteland. Certainly is this week.
He's a good price too, so I'm okay with that for sure.
And he gets some red zone targets. Like, I think he's an okay, kind of not a punt, but a cheap enough option at that position.
Yep.
Okay, well, that wraps up the game by game section. Do you want to do a build?
Yeah, we could talk about the chalk we're eating or fading real quick and then dive right in. Is there anybody that stands out chalk-wise that you are 100% on board with this week and you're eating it, and anybody that is chalky that you don't want to play?
I will eat Ty Chandler, just like that game in general. He's cheap. He should have a huge role again. Jets defense, I generally will not eat a chalky defense. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It's understandable. It's just a defense. You never know what's going to happen. Jefferson is chalk I would eat. DeAndre Hopkins, maybe not. He is affordable. I get it, but Ryan Tannehill is in there this week. I have no faith in him whatsoever. Rachaad White, I get it. He's played over 80% of the snaps like every week since week 6 or something like that. He's fine. CeeDee Lamb's chalky, good game, but he's quite expensive as well. And yeah, Fields and DJ Moore, I think that might be the best two-man stack on the whole slate.
I agree. Jefferson is absolutely chalk I'm eating. I would probably end up fading Singletary. I like Ty Chandler. I like Trey McBride. If you're playing Fields, I think eating the DJ Moore chalk is fine. I like the Komet pivot a lot, just as far as getting different with your field stacks. DeAndre Hopkins is a good chalk fade to me. And I'm not really excited to play JT in his first game back. I would much rather get a little bit creative there, especially if he's going to be high owned, and use Derrick Henry, play Bijan when nobody wants to play him. You got Breece Hall right there, Tony Pollard. So those are, that's probably it for me for what I'm eating or not eating chalk. And agreed on the defensive front. I do not like eating defensive chalk ever.
I don't think Garrett Wilson is particularly good chalk just because of their QB situation. Like, if Garrett Wilson beats me, then fine. But if he's going to be super owned, I don't think that's something I actually have to have.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's fair. What is his ownership?
The ownership I have on him now is about 17%.
Oh, really? I must be a little outdated here. I'm only seeing 7.
I think he should come up. That matchup's good, and he's cheap.
Yeah,
and he's the only guy in that offense that does anything.
Yeah, trusting in Trevor Simeon's never easy.
So in a single entry, I assume you'd be starting with Justin Fields.
I would be starting with Justin Fields. But Nick Mullins saves us cash. If you want to start with Nick Mullins, who I do agree is a good play, we can go that route. I'm fine with that.
So, obviously plugging in Mullins, it's nearly a $2,000 discount.
Right.
Good spot. Maybe playing from behind potentially. The whole enchilada. So if we're playing him, obviously we're playing Jefferson.
Yep.
And presumably Hawkinson.
I don't think you have to do a 3-person stack. You definitely can make the argument for Hawk and for Addison. And then are we also including Ty Chandler? Like, these guys are all super viable. Why don't we map out our other key plays, and then if those guys fit, then they fit.
Yeah, so we talked about Chandler. I think that's a guy we should just probably plug in. He's way too cheap.
He is too cheap.
Other running back, JT, Rashad White, Bijan.
Bijan, Breece Hall, Derrick Henry. No, I think Henry and Bijan are going to go overlooked because people are recency bias and people are a little bit afraid. But if you don't like them, Breece Hall's too cheap for that matchup, 6-1.
I'm fine with that. I'd rather play him than Wilson just because he doesn't rely on the QB as much.
And he could get dump offs and short touchdowns.
So that leaves us with 49.80. Obviously, defense will help on that front, which is a total crapshoot and not even worth filling out.
I love the Bears defense this week. They are way better than anybody thinks they are on defense. And the Cardinals have not looked good offensively. Huge game for the Bears, who are weirdly still in the playoff hunt, and they're at home. So that saves you a lot of money. They're only 2.8.
They are cheap.
Okay, because here's the thing. Whether you're watching this and want to trust us and go with the Bears or not, or you, Taylor, too, you're probably going to try to punt defense. So it makes sense to start your build with a cheaper defense, and then you get to whatever one you do end up using. I'm going to pop in Bears here because that's the one I want to – come on. Phone's blowing up over here. That's the one I want to use this week. That's the one I feel good about.
Totally fine with that.
Yeah. There's obviously other options.
I think tight end is a good place to go next. You like McBride.
I do like McBride. That doesn't get us any savings, of course.
Komet. I don't know if I love Komet by himself.
No.
It's viable, I guess. He's cheap.
It's not a great matchup, to be fair.
You pointed out Schultz. That's kind of interesting for 4.6. Kyle Pitts is 4K flat.
Njoku just keeps smashing. Do we even dare fade?
We can dare. I don't know. It's only 400 less than McBride.
How's that matchup looking for tight ends for the Browns? Texans are. Can't see him here. Oh, they're not a great matchup. They haven't allowed any touchdowns to tight ends in the last 4 weeks, so there's that.
Small sample, relatively.
Yeah, of course. But I do think, looking at what teams have done over the last 4 weeks is pretty important because when people look at season-long stats, there's a lot of context being lost there. You can't go just 100% on any stat, I don't think. And sometimes matchups just don't mean anything. Broken plays, teams outsmart the defense, what have you. So just because the Texans haven't allowed a touchdown doesn't mean they won't allow one to Njoku. But it could signal that they've made changes and have become a lot better at defending tight ends. That said, Trey McBride's my favorite play. And Ingram is also good on this slate, I think.
You could play 2 tight ends. Like, that's not unreasonable given where we're landing kind of in the upper 5s. You could plug in Njoku and McBride. Where does that leave you?
Well, let's just go Njoku for now just because he's cheaper. And we'll see what that gets us.
Yeah, so that leaves us with 56 him like 3 spots. 2 wide receivers and flex.
All right. So you mentioned Alec Pierce. I don't like trusting Alec Pierce, but if Pittman is out, you are not wrong. Alec Pierce is viable. And you don't have to stay on Pierce here. The other thing is you also have Jameson Williams who could be more involved. You have Parker Washington who's only 3.8. I feel like there's another guy. Jonathan Mingo could career against the Packers. So let's do one guy in that range so then people can just see how quickly this opens up for other possibilities to end this build.
Just pick the cheap one you wanted the most. Mingo.
Let's do Parker. Let's do Parker Washington. In the event Zay Jones is out, it's going to be him and Ridley.
Okay, now we're up to 65.
I mean, you could punt again here. There's going to be a lot of targets around if some of these guys are out. You could go to Alec here, and all of a sudden you got a 9K to go with. That kind of leaves you in no man's land, though.
How much is Pierce?
4K. What other stud are you looking to prioritize on this slate? Because St. Brown is quite the run back from this
I think that's
stack.
Where you go, right? Like that has to be what you want.
Let's get him, and then you have 4.8 left to wrap it up. You could go Dalton Schultz. You could do a 2 tight end pairing here.
Or Komet.
Could do Komet.
Go Elijah Moore if you want 2 Browns pass catchers by themselves.
Or you could pay up at tight end here and go down a little bit more. There's there's a couple of different ways you could go, I think.
Who would you plug in at 48 in that range?
Up in the 48 doesn't look very appealing. So if we went like McBride and go down to 4-4, you could go Komet. You could go Elijah Moore.
I'm fine with Komet.
Okay, we can end on Komet.
Tight end, baby.
We can end on Komet. I think I would just play with that and then kind of look at, do you want to stick on Mullins? Is, McBride the tight end you want to play? And then you just kind of go from there. But I think this core of a Vikings-Lions stack with Jefferson, St. Brown, Ty Chandler is a pretty good spot to start from. And then adding a pretty reliable running back, too cheap, Breece Hall. It's a pretty good start. But obviously things can change a little bit. I think whether Trevor Lawrence plays or not is going to change things for how I feel about Parker Washington and Zay Jones possibly then Pittman and.
Yeah. So keep an eye on the news. Obviously Sunday morning, everything will be out ahead of time. And I think that's probably a good place to call it.
Yep. Thanks for tuning in. Remember to like and subscribe because then that helps us know we're doing a good job and we keep bringing you back some content like this. This is our first NFL DFS show of the season because we just started doing these DFS build episodes. You can also catch us for our NBA DFS breakdowns, and there will be one of those today as well. Thanks.
Bye.